Gentleman reserves. The gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I claim as much time as I may consume. Mr. Speaker, the bill before the House today, S. 1134, is a controversial bill that represents wasteful government spending, bad transportation policy, and bad environmental policy. A new bridge across the protected St. Croix River between my state of Minnesota and Wisconsin needs to be built. The aging Stillwater Lift Bridge needs to be replaced, and everyone agrees on that. But I support a more affordable and more appropriately scaled replacement bridge. This bill is controversial because it does much more than authorize a replacement bridge. This bill mandates construction of an exotic and massive extradose-style bridge some 219 feet above the St. Croix River at a cost of $700 million for only 18,000 cars per day. This $700 million extradose, Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
In order.
This $700 million extradose mega bridge will connect Oak Park Heights, Minnesota, population 4,700, and Holton, Wisconsin, population 386. I quote from the St. Paul Pioneer Press, January 25, 2012, about Holton, Wisconsin, quote, "It is not big enough for a stop sign on its main street." Holton, Wisconsin may not have a stop sign, but Congress could give it a $700 million bridge. This bill is controversial because if you look at page 2, line 10 of the bill, you will see that the bill dictates the location of this $700 million mega bridge. And I quote from the bill, approximately 6 miles north of Interstate 94 crossing. In other words, this bill mandates a 65-mile-per-hour interstate freeway bridge connecting a town of 368 people and builds it only 6 miles from an existing interstate crossing on the same river. What would the Tea Party call an effective, efficient use of taxpayers' dollars? Would they call this that? The fiscal watchdog group, Taxpayers for Common Sense, calls the bill, and I quote from them, a massive, intrusive misuse of taxpayer money. In a letter to Congress opposing this bill, the Taxpayers for Common Sense said, and I quote from them, in an era of trillion-dollar deficits and $15 trillion national debt, it is simply unacceptable to spend $700 million on a bridge to carry so few vehicles when an interstate bridge exists nearby. This bill is controversial because it is opposed by the Interior Department, which testified before the Senate Energy and National Resources Committee on July 28, 2011, opposing S. 1134. And I quote from the Director of the National Park Service when he stated, "The Department cannot support this legislation as the National Park Service is determined that the St. Croix River project would have a direct and adverse impact to the river, and these impacts cannot be mitigated." To be very clear, I asked Interior Secretary Salazar 2 weeks ago during an Interior Appropriations Subcommittee a direct question, and that was on February 16th, just this month. I asked, does the Interior Department still oppose S. 1134? Interior Salazar responded saying, quote, "Our position remains unchanged. A wild and scenic river is a wild and scenic river. The position of the Park Service was articulated a year ago as the position of the Department. We have, as you know, Congresswoman McCollum, met with the delegations from the 2 states, Secretary LaHood and I have offered to work with a group to see whether or not an alternative can be found." End of quote from Secretary Salazar. Unfortunately, despite opposition from the Interior Department and an offer to work on a compromise solution, Congress will now be voting on a $700 million mega bridge. This bill is controversial because it will directly result in a property tax increase for the residents of Oak Park Heights, Minnesota, a community in which Minnesota's new redistricting map places it in my new congressional district. According to a unanimously passed resolution by the Oak Park Heights City Council, the passage of S. 1134 by Congress will do this to the City of Oak Park Heights. And I quote from the City Council's resolution. Quote, "It will require an estimated $443 in annual property tax increases for the next 10 years to most city homeowners and business owners." A vote for S. 1134 will be a tax increase on Minnesotans. This bill is controversial because it puts Congress in the position of prioritizing spending of $700 million of taxpayers' money to replace one bridge, while Minnesota has more than 1,100 additionally structurally deficient bridges, far less costly, that all are in desperate need of repair or replacement. In fact, dozens of Minnesota state legislators wrote our delegation saying, and I quote, "We are united in our concerns that the current design of the bridge is far too expensive, particularly in light of much more cost-effective alternatives." Those state legislators, many from my congressional district, urged defeat of this legislation. Former Vice President and U.S. Senator Walter Mondale, an original sponsor of the Wild and Scenic River Act, opposes this bill, saying that the passage, and I quote from Vice President Mondale, would be a profound mistake, and he urges a vote against the bill. This bill was even controversial in the Senate. Senator Jeff Bingham, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Energy and National Resources, Senator Mark Udall of Colorado, Senator Marie Cantwell of Washington opposed S. 1134, saying, quote, "In our opinion, waiving the protections of the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act for the Lower St. Croix is bad policy, and it sets a dangerous precedent." Here in the House, this bill is also controversial. It's controversial because this bill is an earmark, pure and simple. This bill designates a specific project in a specific location, and it mandates the construction of a $700 million Exodus bridge design. And it does that all through an exemption to federal law. Of course, earmarks are banned in the House, except when a bill comes to the floor on suspension of rules, and all the rules and points of order are waived, just like this one. This mega bridge was highlighted in the New York Times editorial. The editorial highlights my Minnesota colleague and mega bridge champion, Representative Bachman, who has called for a redefinition of what an earmark is to accommodate, quote, "a bridge over a vital waterway," end of quote. And today, Congresswoman Bachman has been successful in bringing this earmark to the floor. Now, it's not just me. My dear friend from Minneapolis, Mr. Ellison, and other House colleagues in the U.S. Department of Interior are imposing this $700 million bridge. The bill is also opposed by Taxpayers for Common Sense, the Sierra Club, the National Parks Conservation Association, American Rivers, League of Conservation Voters, former Vice President Mondale, and a whole lot of Minnesotans who care deeply about fiscal responsibility, wise transportation investments, and responsible environmental conservation. Tomorrow, we will vote on this bill. The question is, will the House give a rubber stamp to a $700 million mega bridge, or will this Congress reject this bad bill and direct Minnesota and Wisconsin to come up with a smarter plan that would save taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars? Every Minnesotan and every Wisconsin member of this House supports a replacement bridge, none more than me. But I ask my colleagues to reject this fiscally irresponsible bill. Not $1 of Minnesota transportation funds will be lost. I have a Minnesota Department of Transportation document in my hand that outlines how hundreds of millions of dollars could be reprogrammed across our state, creating thousands of jobs and rebuilding roads and bridges in great need of repair. S. 1134 is a bad bill, and it should be defeated by Democrats and Republicans alike. Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.